Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Christian Barrientos Ichaso. I'm international business lawyer. And now in this week, Saturday, with special edition with podcast. Thank you so much. Thank you for subscribing to our YouTube channel and sharing everything about international law, security compliance, anti-corruption, anti-crime, and international buying and selling business. Thank you so much for subscribing. We continue with this podcast Saturday with Martin Arostegui. He's a renowned and experienced journalist, especially in military and intelligence journalists investigate, and especially in military affairs, who has covered the kind of international conflicts that now see on Ukraine. He has worked for Wall Street Journal, Voice of America, the Daily Telegraph, the Washington Times, CNN, Fox News, UP, United Press International, and France 24. And he's author of a book of military special operation called Twilight Warriors. He's the most important now with this podcast. And we talk with Putin, the illusions, ambition, and corruption. To commit genocide has a limit, and it will be the time after 31 days of aggression and invasion and genocide in Ukraine. He's coming to an end due to the disconnect of Russia army and his high command, as well as Putin isolation for fear of an attempt of his life by his environment and happened with that genocide who committed suicide in the bunker in Berlin in 1945, alone and with his own evil. He's Putin. Thank you, Martin, for coming this Saturday.
I'm Christian, and I can see certainly your parallel between Putin and Hitler. But actually, there's another character in Russian history, actually, maybe more, in some ways, is more similar to his career, and I think he's probably and also very, very similar to Joe Stalin, the supreme leader or dictator of the Soviet Union, following the initial Bolshevik Revolution, succeeded Lenin, who led the initial revolution, who through bureaucratic intrigue and ruthless elimination of any opposition, including many Bolsheviks. I mean, he killed probably a lot of his own people. He rose to the supreme command or supreme power inside the Soviet Union and maintained it until his death in the late 40s, early 50s. I don't recall exactly which year, after World War II. And I think this is a style of, it seems to be, of course, Putin, while the Soviet Union collapsed in the late 1980s, Putin appears to have very much been a product of that system. He grew up inside the KGB. That's where he made his career. And he became a leader of Russia, basically, again, through bureaucratic intrigue and manipulating people and institutions that have pretty much been kept intact or succeeded the Soviet Union. Perhaps Russia never really changed that much. And Putin just managed to manipulate those parts of the Soviet Union that existed after the initial communist system structure collapsed, simply to become the dictator of something which was very, very similar, and ruling in a very similar way to which one of the founding dictator of the Soviet Union, Stalin, ruled for decades. Let me make a difference here, a point here. Stalin, unlike Hitler, Stalin didn't rise through any kind of democratic system. I mean, Hitler was a awful, genocidal, worst thing that ever happened. But he did rise at the end of the day through a democratic system. He rose through a political movement that he founded and he led. Stalin didn't do that. He rose through through the bureaucracy of this established by the revolutionary communist system. That's how he came to power, and that's how he maintained power. So, and that's rather more similar to the way Putin has managed to install himself as president and supreme leader of the Soviet Union. And actually, I will draw another difference between Putin and Soviet leaders that succeeded Stalin, which makes a situation which is unstable and more unstable and in a way more frightening, because those who succeeded Stalin, Khrushchev, Brezhnev, Kasparov, and others, formed part of a collective. It was ultimately a collective system of government that succeeded the absolutist communist autocracy of Stalin. They operated through the communist system and the Central Committee, overseen by a Politburo, and out of the Politburo, a president would be elected that would govern that would preside over the entire system. That system doesn't really exist today. I mean, Putin rose through his own personal machinations and manipulations to be a kind of de facto dictator in which everyone else is totally subjugated to him. There is no Politburo really to control him anymore. Decisions in the Soviet Union post-Stalin were made more or less collectively by this sort of gerontocracy of old party hierarchy, the old party hierarchy, and to some extent there was there were certain checks on whoever presided the actual government. Today, there don't seem to be that many checks on Putin. In fact, we just learned that his defense minister disappeared for several weeks following the invasion of Ukraine. Some people who the defense minister being his closest collaborator, one of the regime closest to him, he mysteriously disappeared. There was speculation even that he may have been killed or killed himself or been banished by Putin in some way. It turns out the latest explanation is that he was in hospital, recovering from a heart attack that he received after Putin angrily berated him for what was in very, very, very early stages of the invasion appeared to be a total failure of the Russian plan. So he has since put in jail the head of the FSB, his Secret Service, supposedly for not getting him the correct information to devise the invasion correctly, which is very possible, as well as several other members of the high-ranking members of the secret police and the defense establishment. So we have here, he obviously has ruthless and complete dictatorial powers over the Russian government. There are very few checks on him. And while he may have good reason to conduct a purge, because these people obviously didn't serve him very well, I think he probably did get the wrong information from the SFB. I think the reason of the failure of the Russian invasion was the massive corruption inside the Russian army. And I think a lot of those money that was meant to go for supplies and food and medicines and so on were probably stolen along the way and sold in the black market, or the funds embezzled, God knows what. The corruption inside the Russian armed forces must be massive, and that the failure of this invasion is manifest of that, or the failure so far for them to achieve any of their objectives after 1 month of being in Ukraine. But which is another dysfunction of a dictatorship, of course. A dictatorship in which one man is surrounded by a lot of yes men and acolytes, too busy, mainly concerned about keeping him happy and kissing his ass. He's not going to get the information he needs to make educated decisions. And this is the situation that Putin was confronted with, and this is what is developing. And what I'm afraid of is that as things in Russia, in Ukraine get out of control for the Russians, and all indications are the army is coming apart, and they're already having to pull back from the siege of Kiev because they need the men, I think, to control the Donbass region, which they should have taken by now. This is according to their own defense spokesman. He may get more and more desperate, and at any moment he could conceivably decide to launch an attack with weapons of mass destruction, be it chemical weapons or perhaps a tactical nuke against Kiev or some other Ukrainian city, and there'll be nobody there really to control him. I don't know. I've heard that Putin is sure they're not going to make the weapons, and that someone will receive assurances from someone that if he tries that, they'll shoot him or something like that. But this is all hearsay. The fact of the matter is that there's nobody there right now that can have any check on Putin on what he does. And if he gets desperate enough, he just may do something which beyond what anybody has imagined before.
It's possible the next step of Putin's administration, the bioterrorism, bioattack in Ukraine. You talk about the possible the attack, a biochemical attack. It's possible the next step for continuing in the invasion in Ukraine to do this weapon.
Well, it's possible because he cannot achieve any of his objectives. Or any of his set objectives, the objectives he set for himself, like capturing Kiev and taking out the Zelensky government, with combined conventional land and air operations, which is what he had in mind first. I mean, the initial plan was to land paratroopers in an airport close to Kiev, go into the city, assault the presidential palace, take out the government, install someone presumably he had waiting to a point, and the land forces would then connect by land from Belarusia. This got nipped. This was completely important. It got nipped on the bud. I mean, the Ukraine when the paratroopers landed at Homostel airfield, the Ukrainians are waiting for them. I think most of them were either killed or captured or dispersed into the surrounding woods. Most of the helicopters involved in the operation were destroyed. And of course, land forces have been stalled on the road to Kiev now for weeks, being picked off by guerrilla type operations from the surrounding countryside, which have picked off all their supply trucks and tanks and armored vehicles coming down that highway like sending ducks. And of course, now that the early spring has set in, and snow and ice is melting, the surrounding countryside is mush. So his tanks can't even maneuver outside any paved area outside the road. So I think any idea he may have of taking Kiev is pretty much done. I mean, it's not going to happen. And now I believe they're pulling back supposedly, according to his generals, to defend eastern Ukraine. Where they're also encountering massive difficulties. I mean, Mariupol, which is a mid-sized city. It's in an area very close to regions that Russia already controls, Crimea and Donbass. That should have been a walkover for them. And they're still apparently not fully able to take control. I mean, they have to totally flatten the city. And this is where perhaps weapons of mass, they could use some chemical or biological, or I think probably chemical and biological, that'd be very dangerous because if they don't get affected. But maybe a limited chemical attack or maybe a very small 1 kiloton tactical nuclear attack can be fired off from the artillery piece. And to take off maybe the last residue of opposition in Mariupol to be able to claim it, which it must be absolutely desperate to do. I mean, if it can't take Mariupol, it can't even claim eastern Ukraine. He can't even take that corridor he wanted to keep between Crimea and the Donbass. So that is possible, and he's got a general in charge of Mariupol. He's appointed new general to take command of the siege of Mariupol. who was the same Russian general who advised or was virtually in command of the siege of Aleppo in Syria, where they leveled the entire city with the help of Russian airstrikes and killed, I think, I'm not sure what the count is yet, but you're tens of thousands of people. Before the effect could be taken, I believe chemical weapons were used in Syria. Certainly, if not at the command, certainly under the responsibility or the observation of the Russians. And this is the man you've got now running the siege of Mariupol. It's possible that if he cannot take Mariupol, he may resort to a chemical attack. I'd be prepared to make that prediction. As to Kiev or Odessa or one of the other cities, I don't know. But if he's desperate enough that he can't even take Mariupol, consolidate his hold over eastern Ukraine, which is the region of Ukraine he's going to demand all this negotiation with Zelensky, which supposedly is an ongoing process about nothing. Both sides are saying they can't approximate positions yet. But that is obviously key demand. It's going to be very difficult for him to leave Ukraine without claiming Donbass and eastern Ukraine. He has to take the city. So that is the minimum he can possibly get out of this. And to do it, he may well resort to a chemical, maybe even a small tactical nuclear attack.
So this is very interesting now to talk about the next step. The news talk about the Anonymous have a treaty Putin to reveal high secrets. They say, we are in your palace, in your bedroom, bringing to like 28 gigabytes of document after penetrating the computers of the Central Bank of Russia. That's the more important news about the corruption, the Putin corruption administration in the Central Bank. So why you know about that? That's the report of the secret information in the bank, Central Bank of Russia, and was it possible to commit corruption, Putin?
Well, I mean, I don't yet have the details of the. I've seen the report, but I don't yet have any details about what information they actually got. And they have all the records of all the transactions made by Putin, all his oligarchs, all his top generals. Well, for one thing, I think would give us a very clear picture, a very clear explanation of how this, what's happened here, how this whole Ukraine invasion was started to begin with, and why it's gone so terribly wrong for Putin. Aside from that, of course, it would lay out all the transactions these people, that his regime has made, international transactions, money that I'm sure they've stolen from the national treasury, how they may have used government official funds for their own personal use, that sort of thing. I mean, that's probably what's going to come out of this, although I'm guessing at this stage. But to be honest, Christian, I don't know to what extent. Again, we've talked about sanctions. They're limited. As I said, the former head of MI6 said that it takes 2 years for them to even have any real effect. And I don't know the extent to which this will have any needed impact on Putin or his oligarchs. It's possible, but so far, I mean, look, I mean, sanction-wise, German Chancellor Scholz just said that while the U.S. has pressured him to cut all purchases of Russian oil, it's not going to happen. He can't do it. I mean, it would push Europe into a terrible recession, and he cannot assure alternative supplies, so that's out. Okay, any idea that Europe was going to cut off all oil energy purchase from Russia, or purchase of energy from Russia, is pretty much disbanded right now. I mean, it's not going to happen. Okay, I always had my doubts that would happen, but the German Chancellor has confirmed that that's not going to happen. And then, interestingly enough, Christian, we've had this interesting story coming out of Spain, in which they've a major villa, a huge, a villa. It's a fortress type mansion, a chateau type, hilltop chateau type mansion complex of massive proportions. Actually, something rather similar to Hitler's Baghdad Gardens and the Austrian Alps in World War II. This sort of retreat in the mountains and in the hills, totally isolated. Well, it's not actually near the Spanish resort of Marbella, but yes, I mean, completely guarded with guard posts and kind of a guard force all of its own, with its own kind of control room and all kinds of luxuries where Putin often spent time along with his wife and his mistress, and its own through a consortium of oligarchs close to Putin, in which he formed part. Presumably, the house belongs to him, owned through third parties, through the oligarchs like Berezovsky, who was involved in this construction project. So, and frankly, the Spanish barely haven't touched it. They haven't gone into reclaimment. There's been no, like they have done with some of Putin's properties in the UK and in France. In Spain, the Spanish authorities have not confiscated this yet, nor made any indication that they're doing so. So again, I mean, there's still a lot of these yachts floating around. They've managed to catch a few of them, but there's still quite a few moving to the Maldives or around the place. I hear that a lot of them have gone dark, so they can't be turning off the transponders, so they cannot be traced by satellite. I suppose if one of them sinks, somebody will know about it. So that's the situation. I mean, even with the draconian sanctions they've imposed, which are supposed to be the worst ever against done against any government, there's still a lot that there has been a lot that hasn't been caught, a lot that hasn't been touched yet.
The reminder of the corruption administration put into that is a corrupt, yeah. The palace is the evidence.
Well, I mean, he's so corrupt that he corrupted him. I mean, his government is so corrupt that ultimately it ended up destroying him. I mean, assuming this is going to destroy him, I don't know. I mean, these guys have incredible staying power. I mean, everybody said Saddam Hussein was through after the invasion of Kuwait, and the army was just totally defeated and humiliated. But these guys have a lot of staying power, despite all the massive mistakes and excesses they commit. Like his idea that he could corrupt everybody around him and still think that he could rely on them to give him honest assessments and do an honest job for him when they were all identified thieves, which is what deprived his army of the capability to do anything. And but as I say, I mean, these guys have tremendous staying power. I mean, in the case of Saddam Hussein, of course, everybody thought it was through after the invasion of Kuwait. But he stayed on there until the U.S. Army finally invaded Iraq, in a possible own contravention of international law, highly questionable. But it was the only way to get him out. They had to go in there, and they finally dug him out of a hole and executed him. But it took a new invasion. It took an invasion of Iraq, and months of occupation, and a massive search operation to find him. Now. Putin has taken precautions against the coup. I mean, it's interesting, in fact, that one of the problems he's having in Ukraine is that the troops which have been committed there are basically very second rate. They are mostly conscripts. A lot of them, in fact, have been conscripted after their enlistment was over. So they were forcibly taken back into the army to the Kuwait to invade Ukraine. The most unmotivated troops you can probably imagine. They so much so that the units are completely abandoned. I mean, they don't have food, they don't have water. I mean, they're so second rate in the Soviet, in the pecking order of the Russian army, that yeah, their supply and their supply is minimal. The really elite unit of the Russian army, what they call the Guards Division, is most of it remains in Moscow. Of course, protecting Putin. And it's, in fact, it's very similar to what Saddam Hussein did in Kuwait.
I remember.
The troops in Kuwait that were, were folded in no time at all when the Americans went in, were second-rate troops. I mean, very badly supplied, badly armed, fully equipped, fully trained. He had kept the Republican Guard, the elite forces, inside Iraq, and they were there to crush the Kurdish and Shiite rebellion in eastern Iraq after the war. When, as you recall, this rebellion in the Shia part of Iraq, which there was at first it seemed like it was going to topple Saddam, but no, he unleashed the Republican Guard on them, which remained largely intact, and crushed the rebellion and managed to stay in power that way. I don't know if Russia is actually going to devolve to such a crude scenario. But I honestly wouldn't put a test. I mean, as I say, the difference between Putin and Saddam Hussein is Putin has only has nuclear weapons. And all kinds of chemical weapons that Saddam was supposed to have and ended up not having. As we all know. Putin has them. I think we all know that Putin has them. How this alters the situation, I don't know. I think ultimately must give them ultimately more staying power. But first, possibly an indefinite staying power. So anyway, that's fine.
What's going on in the Russia crisis with the people now? In this war, Russia war is, we know the people is in crisis, economic crisis in Russia. What's going on there?
The economic crisis in Russia, well, Christian, probably hasn't hit people that badly. As far as we know, there's a lot of people there still believe a lot of the propaganda that the Russian government is putting out, that they're fighting for the freedom of Ukraine, and that they're fighting against Nazis, and trying to, a lot of the people, I'd say, well, at least 1/3 of the population believe it. 1/3 of the population probably fully supports Putin and backs what he's doing, we're still very far from the full effects of the sanctions being felt in the population. Okay, they don't see McDonald's anymore. McDonald's is shut in Moscow. I'm sure a lot of people have initially some people have lost their jobs. There may be shortages of something. The acquisition power of the ruble has gone down. Ruble is devalued. I mean, we're all suffering inflation, I guess, throughout the world. That's not limited to Russia. But yeah, I don't think the full effects of the sanctions really have sunk in. I mean, they will in time, and the country will be very impoverished if this continues. But I don't think that people really feel it that much yet. There was something's wrong, but it hasn't really affected their personal lives yet. They've all still got their cars, still got their apartments, still getting whatever they get from the government. So it's not it hasn't really sunk in. And as I say, I think Putin has the enthusiastic support of probably 1/3.
Similar how North Korea. It's a similar how North Korea.
Very similar. And in fact, I've often been told that I've often heard, for example, that if North Korea were to invade South Korea, there will be mass desertions by the North Korean army. If they cross the border into South Korea, they would probably, a lot of them would just surrender and give themselves up. For food, because they're all starving. Right? Russia, I mean, is something similar is happening with the Russian troops in Ukraine. They just don't want to fight. They just want to be able to eat and find shelter. I mean, in fact, there was this incredible case of this week in which one Russian sold his tank a Russian tank crew sold their tank to the Ukrainians for 10,000 euros. You know, so yeah, I mean, the situation is similar. His land forces are so deprived that they cannot possibly, like the rest of the population, they cannot really mount any kind of serious long-term military campaign. But they've got nukes. This is why North Korea needs those nukes. That's the only thing that gives them any leverage. They can nuke Seoul in a couple of in minutes, in an hour.
Okay.
And they keep showing them that they have the capability to do so. Yeah? With all the missile tests that they conducted, which they conducted one recently, just so nobody would forget. So yeah, it's right. There are similarities with North Korea, which of course is an ally of Russia.
It's a plan ship. It's a plan of the dictatorship. It's a plan. A similar Maduro, North Korea, Saddam Hussein, corruption, and all in the plan is a similar. It's incredible. This
I mean, these dictators keep themselves in power by keeping everybody around them corrupt. I mean, they're all compromised in a criminal enterprise. Okay?
Criminal enterprise.
Very few exceptions. And in fact, no exceptions, I've said. And so, which makes it, of course, very difficult for them to, for an internal coup to develop. That would only happen, and they protect themselves very well besides.
China have a new rules in this, the financial economic Russia financial now. It support now to Russia, China. Why do this China in this moment? Is not with the free war? Is a similar Putin now? Or is the new echo of the evil Axel?
Well, China was never the free world, Christian. China has always been, since now, China's been a communist dictatorship of the worst kind. I mean, they've committed atrocities worse than even Stalin. I mean, they starved millions of people. It's a draconian totalitarian system. The teacher would be brought up and teachers would be executed not even on suspicion of being an loyal to the regime, but because they might be. Because, unless they could prove that they weren't going to be unloyal, they were executed.
Yeah.
Not they had done anything or said anything or even known to have thought anything, just they had to prove that they wouldn't. This is the kind of system China evolved. I mean, it's a bit better. It's rather better today. I mean, nobody says that we're still back in the cultural revolution, but I mean, China's certainly not with the free world. I think China is going to take advantage of Russia. Russia will become more dependent on China as the West diminishes their purchase of Russian energy, which will happen. I think eventually it's going to be a scale down of purchases of Russian oil and gas. China's going to get all that. In fact, they're already getting more, which they need. So it's much to the benefit of China. And they're getting it cheap. And they're going to gain control over all of Russia's commodities, massive minerals, nickel, all this other stuff, lithium, all this other stuff. At dirt cheap prices, because Russia is going to need China's support to survive. In return, they're going to get these loans, that rolling loans that only serve basically to maintain the bureaucracy going, to maintain the criminal enterprise going.
Yeah, criminal enterprise.
That's what China is going to give Russia. China is going to take over Putin's mafia, Putin's Russian mafia, and which of course all these guys are just bought money. I mean, China became a rival to Russia during the Cold War. And in fact, it was the United States, was President Nixon, who very cleverly, and presidents following him, who very cleverly played Russia and China against each other in order to win the Cold War. It was because he managed to get China to pressure Russia in certain areas, particularly in Southeast Asia, that led to the collapse of the Soviet Union. Of course, having learned from that, I don't think China or Russia going to make a similar mistake again. So I think what is happening today, in my estimation, will probably only serve to push them together. I mean, there will always be problem. There will always be problems between them. I mean, you know, it's you've got two mafias, two criminal, two totalitarian governments. There's always a problem. There are always problems between them. There will be, inevitably. But I think they may decide that they better stick together if they're going to confront the United States and maybe eventually prevail. If they have any chance of prevailing in confrontation with the United States.
Yeah, the new organization of the criminal actors. How Iran is introducing support with a drones technology of the drones for Russia. It's possible in this week to continue to support Iran. What do you think about the military intelligence about the Iran in the participation with Russia?
Well, I mean, Iran has become a sort of a Russian client state. I mean, it has been for quite some time. Again, they develop. Again, Russia runs or has supplied their air defense system, the S-400, the most advanced anti-aircraft missile, surface-to-air missile system that exists. It's patented a lot of its weapons for Iranian manufacture. Iran manufactures its own version of the AK-47, the Kalashnikov, for example. And it's in many other areas. Iran and the Russian military have become very, very close. Russia is also a part of the negotiating process by which Iran hopes to be able to get sanctions dropped on this nuclear program. It's one of the guarantors of the nuclear deal that was reached with Iran under President Obama. In fact, in recent efforts by the U.S. to fast track the negotiations with Iran in order to be able to buy oil, to open up the Iranian oil market to get oil from Iran and bring prices down. One of the problems with Russia that they felt that the deal was not favorable to them. They were going to get anything out of it, and that's one of the reasons that now it seems to have broken down. So yeah, no, they are very involved with Iran as a client, as an advisor, and maybe as a broker. Of the Iranian regime. Yeah.
Yes. So new scenario of the storm in the war. For conclusion, dear Martin, what you think about in this week to continue? What's the next step for the security, international security, in your opinion?
Ooh, that's a big question, Christian. I expect. I got ahead of myself last week saying that negotiations were there seem to be prospects of a negotiated solution, though that seems to have diminished somewhat now for Ukraine. Although talks are ongoing. I think probably Turkey is involved in trying to broker a deal. How much leverage Turkey will have on that is questionable. My suspicion, Christian, is now that you mentioned China, perhaps China may come in there and broker a deal between Ukraine and Russia. That's perhaps what might happen, in which case that would be in itself a very destabilizing. Well, if they stabilize Ukraine, it would be a very destabilizing factor for international security.
Thank you, Martin. I appreciate your time in this moment, in this special moment, in this Saturday with the podcast, International Security. Thank you so much, Martin Arostegui. Thank you. Guys, subscribe to YouTube channel and sharing everything about international security, compliance, anti-corruption, and business. We're the podcast. Thank you, Martin.
Thanks, Christian. See you next week.
Next week, next Saturday, subscribe and share this video for more. Thank you so much.